Hey friends, tonight we're drifting far back in time to the sands of ancient Egypt, a world of sun gods, sacred cats, and apparently lost footwear. Our story isn't about epic battles or golden tombs, it's about a pharaoh, a pair of missing sandals, and the poor moon who somehow took the blame. Strange? Absolutely. But history's full of odd little corners like this, and I'm glad you're here to explore one with me. Before we begin, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you honestly enjoy these sleepy, strange stories I share. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing who's out there joining our quiet little journey. Now dim the lights, maybe put on a fan for some background hum, and let's slip gently into tonight's tale. Picture yourself floating down the ancient Nile on a warm evening, where the water catches the last golden light of day, and palm fronds whisper secrets to the gentle breeze. The air smells of lotus blossoms and that particular kind of dust that's been warmed by Egyptian sun for thousands of years. Now let your mind drift back about 4,000 years to a time when pharaohs ruled as living gods, and every decision, from building pyramids to choosing breakfast, was considered divinely inspired. This is the story of Pharaoh Kheti III, ruler of all Egypt, master of the two lands, beloved of Ra, and quite possibly the most paranoid man to ever lose a pair of shoes. You see, Kheti had many admirable qualities. He built temples, kept the kingdom prosperous, and managed not to start any unnecessary wars. But he also had one tiny, insignificant character flaw. When things went wrong, he had a remarkable talent for blaming absolutely anyone or anything except himself. And on one particularly fateful morning, this talent would lead him to prosecute the moon itself for theft. Because apparently, when you're considered a living god, basic logic becomes optional. Dawn in ancient Memphis arrived the way it always had, slowly, gently, like honey spreading across warm bread. The first light crept over the palace walls, painting the limestone columns in shades of rose and gold. You can almost hear the soft shuffle of bare feet on cool stone as the palace began its daily awakening ritual. In the royal chambers, servants moved like graceful shadows, their movements practiced and silent. They knew better than to wake Pharaoh Kheti before the sun god Ra had properly announced the day. The morning air carried the scent of frankincense from the temple courtyards and the distant sound of the Nile lapping against the palace docks, where royal barges waited with their colourful sails furled like sleeping birds. Now, every pharaoh had their peculiarities. Some collected exotic animals, others built increasingly ridiculous monuments to themselves. Kheti's obsession was considerably more grounded. He had an absolutely devoted relationship with his footwear. Not just any footwear, mind you, his golden sandals, crafted by the finest leather workers in all of Egypt, blessed by 3 separate priests, and decorated with enough precious stones to purchase a small village. These weren't just shoes, they were practically sacred artifacts. The leather had been specially treated with oils from the Sudan, the gold thread was spun in the temple workshops, and the gemstones were arranged according to celestial patterns that supposedly granted the wearer divine protection. Or at least, that's what the priests claimed when they presented the bill. The sandals even had their own special servants whose sole job, if you'll pardon the expression, was to ensure they were properly maintained, positioned, and ready for royal feet at a moment's notice. This particular morning was shaping up to be especially important. The harvest blessing ceremony was scheduled. Foreign diplomats from Nubia were arriving with gifts and probably elaborate complaints about trade routes, and there were rumours that the High Priest of Memphis wanted to discuss some new temple construction project that would undoubtedly require vast amounts of royal gold. As the morning light grew stronger, you might imagine the gentle bustle of preparation echoing through the corridors. Kitchen servants were already preparing the royal breakfast, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, honey cakes that practically melted on the tongue, and dates so perfectly sweet they seemed to capture sunshine itself. The royal scribes were organising their papyrus scrolls, preparing to record every profound utterance their divine Pharaoh might make throughout the day. But in the heart of it all, something was about to go terribly, hilariously wrong. Because in just a few moments, Pharaoh Kheti would discover that being a living god doesn't necessarily make you immune to life's smaller, more embarrassing mysteries. The kind that start with missing footwear and end with cosmic accusations. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows through the palace windows, when Pharaoh Kheti finally stirred from his royal slumber. Picture him stretching beneath silk covers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, expecting to begin another day of being magnificently, divinely important. His first conscious thought, as always, was of his beloved golden sandals, not of the kingdom's welfare, not of the day's ceremonies, but of those gleaming, gem-encrusted pieces of footwear that had become as essential to his identity as his crown. He reached toward the small golden pedestal, where they always rested beside his bed. Polished to perfection, and positioned just so, his hand found only empty air. You can almost feel that peculiar sinking sensation in your stomach when something that should absolutely, definitely be where you left it simply isn't. Katie's eyes snapped open, and he stared at the vacant pedestal with the kind of confusion usually reserved for witnessing miracles or watching cats attempt to understand mirrors. "Servant," he called, his voice carrying that particular note of royal panic that palace staff had learned to recognise from 3 corridors away. Within moments, his chamber was filled with a small army of attendants, all bowing and awaiting instructions, while trying not to notice that their divine Pharaoh appeared to be having a footwear crisis. "My sandals," Ketty announced with the gravity of someone reporting a natural disaster, "are missing." What followed was the kind of organised chaos that could only occur in a royal household where the smallest inconvenience becomes a matter of state security. Picture servants scurrying through every corner of the palace like industrious ants, lifting cushions, peering under furniture, and checking places where sandals had absolutely no business being. The royal cats found themselves subjected to thorough interrogations, though they maintained their typical feline policy of providing no useful information whatsoever. The head chamberlain appeared, looking as though someone had personally offended his ancestors. In ancient Egypt, the disappearance of royal property wasn't just embarrassing, it was potentially catastrophic. Palace staff could lose positions, privileges, or in extreme cases various body parts, depending on the pharaoh's mood and the item's importance. Guards were stationed at every entrance. The royal treasury was checked in case someone had confused priceless sandals with other priceless objects. Even the sacred ibis birds in the palace courtyard were observed suspiciously, though their potential for sandal theft seemed limited by basic physics and their complete lack of opposable thumbs. Meanwhile, priests were hastily consulted about the spiritual implications of missing royal footwear. Ancient Egyptian religion was remarkably comprehensive, covering everything from proper mummification techniques to the divine significance of various vegetables. But oddly enough, the sacred texts seem to have overlooked specific protocols for sandal disappearance. As the morning progressed and the search proved fruitless, you might notice how the palace atmosphere shifted from mild concern to genuine bewilderment. Here was a mystery that defied all logical explanation, The Sandals hadn't grown legs and walked away, though given their divine blessing, even that wasn't entirely impossible. They were simply, inexplicably gone. And Pharaoh Kheti, accustomed to having explanations for everything delivered to him on golden platters, was beginning to develop that dangerous combination of confusion and royal indignation that historically led to some rather questionable decision-making. Because clearly, when you're a living god and your footwear vanishes into thin air, someone or something was going to be held responsible. By midday, when the Egyptian sun had climbed high enough to make the limestone palace walls warm to the touch, Pharaoh Kheti had moved beyond simple bewilderment into the realm of elaborate conspiracy theories. Picture him pacing his royal chambers, silk robes swishing with each agitated step, while his advisors stood in careful formation, close enough to hear his pronouncements, far enough to avoid becoming targets of his growing paranoia. The first suspects, naturally, were his fellow pharaohs. You see, ancient Egypt wasn't always the unified kingdom we imagine. Sometimes it split into competing regions, each with their own ruler, leading to the kind of petty rivalries that would make modern neighbourhood disputes look remarkably civilised. Kheti's imagination began conjuring images of elaborate sandal-stealing plots orchestrated by his rivals. The Pharaoh of Heracleopolis, he declared to his assembled court, gesturing dramatically toward the north. He's always coveted my footwear collection. Remember last year's diplomatic feast? The way his eyes lingered on my ceremonial boots? His advisors nodded solemnly, though you might suspect they were simply agreeing with whatever kept their pharaoh from making increasingly erratic decisions. The theory had a certain logic to it, if you ignored basic geography, and the fact that stealing sandals seemed like an unusually petty way to wage political warfare. But Kheti was just getting started. His mind, freed from the constraints of reasonable thinking, began weaving increasingly elaborate scenarios. Next came the priests. Now, in ancient Egypt, priests wielded considerable power and weren't always perfectly aligned with royal wishes. They controlled temples, managed vast wealth, and occasionally expressed opinions about how pharaohs should conduct themselves. Kheti's eyes narrowed as he considered their potential motives. Perhaps, he mused aloud, stroking his carefully groomed beard, the high priest of Ptah has grown tired of blessing my sandals every month. Maybe he's decided to eliminate the source of his irritation entirely. One of his advisors made the mistake of pointing out that stealing seemed rather unlike proper priestly behaviour, which earned him a look that could have melted bronze. The afternoon heat seemed to intensify Kheti's suspicions rather than calm them. As servants moved through the corridors with cool drinks and palm fans, whispers began circulating about foreign spies. The Nubians to the south had recently sent a trade delegation, and everyone knew they had an appreciation for fine craftsmanship. Their own sandals were quite impressive, but perhaps not impressive enough. "Those Nubian ambassadors," Kheti announced, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had just solved a particularly complex mathematical problem. "They arrived 3 days ago, and now my sandals are missing. Coincidence? I think not." He began describing elaborate scenarios involving diplomatic pouches, midnight raids, and international footwear smuggling operations that would have impressed modern espionage novelists. As the day wore on, you can almost feel the palace atmosphere growing thicker with tension and increasingly creative theories. Servants found themselves subjected to detailed questioning about their movements, their loyalties, and their personal feelings about royal footwear. The palace cats, already under suspicion, were now being watched with the kind of intensity usually reserved for military surveillance. Even the royal scribes weren't immune to scrutiny. Perhaps they had grown resentful of recording endless proclamations about sandal care and maintenance. Maybe the royal architect harboured secret grudges about having to design special storage spaces for shoes. The possibilities seemed endless, and Katie's imagination showed no signs of slowing down. By evening, as oil lamps began flickering to life throughout the palace, and the Nile reflected the first stars of twilight, the investigation had expanded to include practically everyone who had ever set foot in the royal quarters. Palace guards were interrogating kitchen staff about their access to the royal chambers. Gardeners were questioned about their knowledge of secret passages. Even the royal food tasters found themselves explaining their whereabouts during the crucial overnight hours. And through it all, the golden sandals remained stubbornly, mysteriously absent, as if they had simply decided to take a holiday from their divine duties. But Pharaoh Katie's mind was far from finished with its investigative journey. The most outrageous theory was yet to come. As the Egyptian twilight painted the sky in shades of deep purple and gold, Pharaoh Katie found himself standing on his palace balcony, gazing up at the evening stars with the intensity of someone expecting them to provide answers. The Nile below reflected the first glimmers of moonlight like scattered diamonds, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine through the warm air. It was then that his court astronomer, a learned man named Khemwaset, who spent most of his time calculating flood seasons and determining auspicious dates for royal ceremonies, made what would prove to be a fateful observation. "Your Divine Majesty," he said, approaching with the careful deference of someone who had witnessed his pharaoh's increasingly creative theories throughout the day. "I couldn't help but notice that last night's moon was particularly bright, unusually so, in fact. You can almost see the moment when this innocent comment ignited something dangerous in Katie's imagination. His eyes, which had been scanning the darkening sky with mild frustration, suddenly focused with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. The moon, nearly full and glowing with that ethereal silver light that had inspired poets and lovers for millennia, suddenly became not a thing of beauty, but a suspect. "The moon," Katie repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "The moon was unusually bright last night." He turned to face his astronomer with the expression of someone who had just discovered fire. "And when did my sandals disappear?" "Last night." What followed was a masterpiece of circular logic that would have impressed philosophers for all the wrong reasons. In Katie's rapidly developing theory, the moon, that celestial body that governed tides, marked time, and featured prominently in Egyptian religious ceremonies, had apparently developed an unhealthy obsession with royal footwear. "Think about it," he announced to his gathered advisors, who had learned that thinking too hard about their pharaoh's theories led to headaches. "The moon controls the Nile's floods, influences the behaviour of animals, and clearly has power over earthly objects. Why wouldn't it covet the most beautiful sandals in all of Egypt?" The logic, such as it was, continued to unfold. Ancient Egyptians genuinely believed that celestial bodies could influence daily life. They had entire systems of astrology, religious ceremonies timed to lunar cycles, and beliefs about the moon's connection to various gods and goddesses. But somehow, Katie managed to take these perfectly reasonable spiritual concepts and twist them into the first recorded case of lunar larceny in human history. "The moon goddess Khonsu," he declared, warming to his theme, "must have seen my sandals glinting in the lamplight and decided they would make perfect celestial accessories. After all, what's the point of ruling the night sky if you can't have properly divined footwear?" His court astronomer, who had spent years studying the precise movements of heavenly bodies and could calculate eclipses with remarkable accuracy, found himself in the peculiar position of being asked to confirm whether the moon had developed criminal tendencies. The other advisors exchanged glances that spoke volumes about the challenges of serving a pharaoh whose imagination had apparently divorced itself from conventional reality. As the night deepened and the accused moon climbed higher in the star-scattered sky, you might find yourself wondering if you've ever blamed celestial bodies for your own missing belongings. Perhaps that lost sock wasn't eaten by the washing machine after all. Maybe it was recruited for some cosmic fashion emergency. And so began what would surely go down as the most unusual legal proceeding in Egyptian history: the formal accusation of the moon for theft of royal property. Because apparently, when you're a living god with a missing shoe problem, even the heavens aren't beyond suspicion. Dawn arrived to find the palace in a state of unprecedented preparation. Word had spread through Memphis like ripples on the Nile that Pharaoh Kheti intended to conduct a formal trial of the moon itself, and the entire royal administration had somehow managed to treat this announcement as though it were perfectly reasonable court business. You can almost picture the scribes frantically searching their records for legal precedents involving celestial defendants, coming up remarkably empty-handed. The great courtyard had been transformed into an impromptu courtroom, with ceremonial chairs arranged under a silk canopy that fluttered gently in the morning breeze. Priests from various temples had been summoned, not because they particularly wanted to participate in prosecuting a celestial body, but because refusing a pharaoh's direct invitation tended to result in career difficulties and occasional architectural projects involving very small, uncomfortable spaces. As the sun climbed higher, casting intricate shadows through the palm fronds, the formal proceedings began. Kheti had donned his most impressive ceremonial robes, the ones usually reserved for communicating with gods, apparently considering this an appropriate occasion for divine-level formal wear. The irony that he was barefoot due to his missing sandals seemed lost on everyone present. The court astronomer Khaim Waset had been appointed as the primary witness, a role he accepted with the resignation of someone who had already calculated that arguing with his pharaoh about the moon's legal culpability was unlikely to improve his employment prospects. He presented his evidence with the careful precision of a man walking through a field of sleeping cobras. "Your Divine Majesty," he began, consulting his carefully prepared notes. The defendant moon was indeed unusually bright on the night in question. Its luminosity was approximately 30% above normal levels for this time of lunar cycle. He paused, clearly hoping that someone would point out the logical gap between bright moonlight and footwear theft, but the assembled court maintained diplomatic silence. The evidence continued to unfold in ways that would have challenged the finest legal minds of any era. Palace guards testified about mysterious shadows they might have seen moving across the courtyard, shadows that could, theoretically, have been moon-directed sandal retrieval operations. The head gardener was called upon to discuss whether the night-blooming jasmine had seemed more agitated than usual, possibly indicating celestial interference with normal palace routines. Perhaps most memorably, the palace cats were brought forward as witnesses. Now, ancient Egyptians held cats in remarkably high regard, considering them sacred and possessed of supernatural awareness. Unfortunately, when formally questioned about their observations of the previous evening, the feline witnesses provided testimony that was characteristically unhelpful. They sat with that particular cat expression that suggests they know exactly what happened, but consider humans too intellectually limited to understand the explanation. The priests, meanwhile, found themselves in the delicate position of having to discuss lunar theology without accidentally contradicting either established religious doctrine or their pharaohs' increasingly elaborate theories. They spoke carefully about the moon's traditional roles in Egyptian mythology, its connection to timekeeping, its influence on fertility cycles, its association with various deities, while diplomatically avoiding any mention of whether these responsibilities typically included retail theft. As the morning progressed, you might imagine the surreal spectacle of formal legal proceedings being conducted against an entity that was currently invisible, having set hours earlier and presumably gone about its normal celestial business, completely unaware of its legal troubles. Court scribes dutifully recorded every word of testimony, creating what would surely become the most unusual legal document in Egyptian administrative history. The climax came when Katie himself took the floor to present his closing arguments. Standing beneath the silk canopy, gesturing toward the empty sky, where the moon would eventually reappear, he delivered a speech that combined genuine royal authority with logic so creative it practically qualified as performance art. "Citizens of Egypt," he declared, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the confidence of absolute certainty, "we have heard the evidence. We have examined the facts. The moon stands accused of coveting and unlawfully appropriating royal property, and I find the evidence compelling. And so, in a verdict that would echo through history as either the most creative problem-solving or the most spectacular missing the point ever recorded, the moon was formally found guilty of sandal theft. With the moon officially convicted of royal sandal theft, Pharaoh Kheti faced the delicate question of appropriate punishment. How exactly does one discipline a celestial body? The answer, as it turned out, involved a remarkable amount of incense, ceremonial chanting, and the kind of elaborate ritual that ancient Egyptians had perfected into an art form. The priests, having committed themselves to this cosmic legal proceeding, threw themselves into designing suitable lunar consequences with impressive creativity. They proposed a series of ceremonies involving sacred oils, protective amulets, and strongly worded prayers that would theoretically convince the moon to return the stolen property and refrain from future footwear-related crimes. Picture the scene as evening approached. The palace courtyard, filled with flickering oil lamps, priests arranged in solemn circles, and the sweet smoke of frankincense drifting up toward the gradually darkening sky. Katie stood at the centre of it all, barefoot but dignified, preparing to deliver divine justice to the heavens themselves. The ritual had barely begun when a small voice interrupted the proceedings. A young servant girl named Nefret, who cleaned the royal chambers and had been too frightened to speak during the day's increasingly dramatic events, finally gathered enough courage to approach her pharaoh. "Your divine majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ceremonial chanting. I found something while preparing your chambers for tonight." You can almost feel the collective held breath of the entire assembly as she produced, from beneath her simple linen robe, a pair of unmistakable golden sandals. They gleamed in the lamplight exactly as they always had, their precious stones catching the flickering flames like captured stars. The silence that followed was the kind that makes even crickets pause their evening songs. Nefret, trembling slightly, explained that she had discovered the sandals tucked far under the royal bed, apparently kicked there in the casual way that people have been losing shoes under furniture since the invention of both shoes and furniture. Now, you might expect this revelation to result in royal embarrassment, perhaps some sheepish acknowledgement of the day's elaborate misunderstanding. But Pharaoh Kheti faced with evidence that completely undermined his cosmic conspiracy theory, demonstrated the kind of creative problem-solving that had apparently gotten him through his entire reign. "Ah," he announced with the confidence of someone who had planned this outcome all along, "clearly our divine justice has worked faster than expected. The moon, properly chastised by our ceremonies, has returned my sandals exactly where they belong." He slipped on his beloved footwear with obvious relief, wiggling his toes in their familiar golden embrace. "Let this be a lesson to all celestial bodies," he declared solemnly to the night sky. "Royal property is not to be trifled with, and Egyptian justice reaches even to the heavens themselves." And so the moon learned never to covet royal footwear again, or at least that's how the official palace records would tell the story. So, our divine ruler finally found his wayward sandals tucked behind a statue of himself, because apparently even ancient Egyptians enjoyed a bit of irony. The moon, naturally, offered no apology for this alleged theft, continuing its silent journey across the star-scattered sky just as it had for thousands of years before our Pharaoh's footwear crisis. But you know, losing sandals and blaming celestial bodies, that was really just Tuesday for our divine ruler. Because when you're supposedly a living god with dominion over the greatest civilization on Earth, even the smallest inconveniences become cosmic events worthy of royal proclamation. Now, as you settle deeper into your comfortable spot, perhaps adjusting your pillow just so, let's drift back through time together. Back to those sun-warmed days along the Nile, where palm fronds whispered ancient secrets and the air shimmered with heat and possibility. We're going to follow our pharaoh through an entire day, from the moment golden sunlight first touched the palace walls, to the gentle hour when oil lamps flickered low and dreams beckoned. You'll discover that being a god-king wasn't all golden chariots and adoring crowds, though there was certainly plenty of both. So close your eyes if you haven't already, let your breathing slow to match the ancient rhythm of the Nile, and prepare to spend 24 hours in the most powerful sandals in the ancient world, assuming, of course, we can keep track of them this time. Picture this: the first golden rays of Ra's chariot creeping across the horizon, painting the palace walls in warm, honey light. Somewhere in the distance, the Nile murmurs its eternal song, gentle and constant. And in the royal bedchamber, our divine pharaoh is about to experience what might be the most elaborate wake-up call in human history. Now, you might think being a god would come with the luxury of sleeping in, but apparently the gods keep very punctual schedules, because at the precise moment when dawn kisses the eastern walls, the first priest begins his morning chant. Soft at first, almost like a lullaby in reverse, then joined by another voice, and another, until the gentle harmony floats through silk curtains like incense made of sound. Because nothing says divine ruler quite like needing 20 people to help you open your eyes, right? The pharaoh stirs on his bed of ebony and gold, sheets of the finest linen, so fine you could almost mistake it for captured moonbeams, whispering against his skin. Can you imagine that feeling? That cool, impossibly smooth fabric that costs more than most people see in a lifetime, gently caressing your arms as consciousness slowly returns. The first servant approaches on silent feet, bare soles making no sound on the polished stone floor that's still cool from the night. In her hands, a golden basin filled with water infused with lotus petals and sweet oils. The scent alone could wake the dead, which, considering some of the pharaoh's neighbours in their eternal rest, might not be entirely metaphorical. Another servant waves a fan made of ostrich feathers, creating the gentlest breeze that carries the morning fragrances, frankincense from the temples, bread baking in the palace kitchens, and that distinctive smell of the Nile at dawn, earthy and life-giving. Now comes the washing ritual, and oh my! If you thought your morning routine was elaborate, prepare to feel wonderfully simple by comparison. Every finger must be cleansed individually, every toe blessed with perfumed water. The pharaoh's face is bathed with cloths so soft they might as well be made from clouds, patted dry with linens that have never known rough handling. Next, the oils. 7 different precious oils, each with its own purpose. There's myrrh for divine protection, cedar oil for strength, and something wonderfully exotic that's been shipped from the mysterious lands beyond the cataracts. The servants' hands work in gentle circles, and you can almost feel that warmth, can't you? The way skilled fingers work the tensions from muscles that have spent the night being divinely perfect. Then comes the dressing ceremony, and honestly, it makes getting ready for a formal dinner look like throwing on pyjamas. First, the undergarments of linen so fine it's practically gossamer. Then the pleated kilt, each fold positioned with mathematical precision. The collar of gold and lapis lazuli, heavy with the weight of divine authority, settling around shoulders that are supposedly strong enough to bear the hopes of an entire civilization. And let's not forget the most important part, the sandals. Yes, those sandals. Golden, jewelled, and hopefully not destined for another mysterious disappearance, courtesy of celestial bodies with a sense of humour. By the time our pharaoh is properly divine and presentable, the sun has climbed higher, warming the air and promising another day of perfect weather. Because apparently, even the climate knew better than to displease a living god. Time for the morning meal, which naturally includes wine, because clearly these ancient Egyptians had their priorities wonderfully, charmingly straight. And so, with the taste of honey cakes and sweet wine on his lips, our pharaoh prepares to face another day of being magnificently, exhaustingly divine. With breakfast settling comfortably in the royal stomach, our pharaoh begins the most sacred part of his day, the morning temple visits. Because apparently, even gods need to check in with the other gods. It's like a divine staff meeting, but with more incense and significantly better architecture. Picture yourself walking barefoot. Well, sandaled foot, let's not tempt fate again, across cool stone floors that have been polished to mirror perfection. Each step echoes softly through corridors lined with columns so massive they seem to hold up the very sky. The air here is different, thick with centuries of prayers, and the lingering sweetness of frankincense that never quite fades. The first temple is dedicated to Ra naturally. The morning sun streams through carefully placed openings, creating shafts of golden light that dance with tiny particles of incense smoke. You can almost see them floating there, can't you? Like tiny spirits celebrating the dawn. The priests have been up since before sunrise, preparing offerings of bread still warm from the ovens, fresh flowers that glisten with dew, and wine that catches the light like liquid rubies. Our pharaoh approaches the inner sanctum, where Ra's golden statue seems to pulse with its own inner light. The morning ritual is precise, a choreography of devotion that's been performed the same way for centuries. 3 steps forward, arms raised to greet the sun god, then the gentle placement of offerings, while whispering prayers in a voice so low, it's almost like a musical hum. The frankincense burns steadily, creating spirals of smoke that rise toward the painted ceiling, where stars and sacred boats drift across an eternal blue sky. The scent wraps around you like a gentle embrace, woody and sweet and mysterious. You breathe it in, and for a moment you understand why ancient peoples believed the gods lived in the very air they breathed. Next comes the administrative side of being divine, because even god kings have paperwork apparently. Our pharaoh settles into his throne room, a space so grand it makes modern palaces look like modest cottages, to meet with his advisors and viziers. Now, here's where things get delightfully predictable. Imagine a room full of the most intelligent, capable administrators in the known world, all of whom agree with absolutely everything their divine ruler suggests. Shocking, I know. Shall we build another monument to my glory? Brilliant idea, divine one. Perhaps we should declare war on clouds for blocking my sun. Your wisdom knows no bounds, Majesty. But between the obvious flattery, real business does get done. Trade agreements with neighbouring kingdoms, reports from distant provinces, where the Nile's annual flood has been particularly generous, and updates on various construction projects that will take decades to complete. The pharaoh listens with the patience of someone who quite literally has all the time in the world, or at least believes he does. The morning judgment sessions are perhaps the most human part of our divine ruler's day. Citizens with disputes travel from across the kingdom for the honour of having their problems solved by a living God, and honestly, some of these cases are wonderfully, charmingly ordinary. Today's docket includes a farmer whose neighbour's goats keep eating his barley, apparently a crisis worthy of divine intervention. There's a merchant convinced that his competitor is using unfair business practices, which basically means he's selling better bread at lower prices. And there's the eternal favourite, two families arguing over a property line that's been disputed for 3 generations. Our pharaoh listens to each case with the solemnity befitting a god, though you can almost sense the gentle amusement behind those coal-lined eyes. His judgments are fair, practical, and delivered with just enough divine authority to make everyone involved feel they've received justice directly from the heavens. By the time the morning's official duties are complete, the sun has climbed high enough to make the palace courtyards shimmer with heat. Time for our divine ruler to seek the cool refuge of his private chambers, where the most challenging decision of the next few hours will be choosing between figs and dainties for his midday refreshment. Truly, the burdens of divinity are endless. Midday in ancient Egypt, when Ra decides to show off just how powerful a sun god can be. The air outside shimmers like water, and even the palace stones seem to exhale gentle waves of warmth. This is when our divine pharaoh demonstrates his most relatable trait, the profound wisdom of knowing when to get out of the heat. You know that feeling on a sweltering summer day when all you want to do is find the coolest, darkest room in your house and just exist there for a while? Well, our pharaoh has elevated this basic human instinct to an art form. The royal retreat from the midday sun isn't just practical, it's practically ceremonial. Picture walking through palace corridors, where the very architecture seems designed to embrace you with coolness. Thick limestone walls that have absorbed the night's gentle temperatures, releasing them slowly through the day like a stone blessing. The floors here are different too, smooth marble that feels wonderfully cool against bare feet, with intricate channels carved along the edges where water flows in the softest, most musical trickle. The pharaoh's private chambers are a sanctuary from the outside world's blazing enthusiasm. Sheer linen curtains hang from ceiling to floor, dyed in colours that seem to capture the very essence of coolness. Deep blues like the Nile at twilight, soft greens like palm fronds in shadow. These curtains don't just hang there, they dance. The slightest breeze sets them in motion, creating gentle waves of fabric that seem to whisper secrets to each other. And the fountains. Oh, the fountains. Not grand splashing affairs that might disturb the peaceful atmosphere, but small contemplative water features where streams of crystal clear water fall from carved lotus blossoms into shallow pools. The sound is hypnotic, a gentle, constant melody that seems to cool the air just by existing. You can almost feel the way that sound settles into your bones, can't you? That perfect white noise that makes everything else fade into comfortable insignificance. The royal lunch is served here in this cool paradise, and naturally, it's an affair that would make modern fine dining look quaint. Servants move like gentle shadows, their feet silent on the cool marble, bringing course after delicate course. Fresh dates stuffed with almonds and honey, bread so soft it practically dissolves on the tongue. Fish from the Nile prepared with spices that have travelled impossible distances to reach this table. There's wine, of course, because apparently our ancestors understood that lunch without wine is just a sad collection of food. The wine is served in golden goblets, so thin they're almost translucent, kept cool in jars buried in wet sand. Each sip is like tasting liquid sunshine that's been gentled by shadow. Entertainment arrives as naturally as the breeze. Musicians with instruments that seem designed specifically for drowsy contentment. There's a harp with strings that sing like gentle rain, a flute that seems to carry melodies directly from some peaceful dream, and drums so soft they're more felt than heard, a gentle rhythm that matches the pulse of a resting heart. The dancers move like silk scarves caught in a summer breeze, their movements so fluid and hypnotic that watching them is almost like meditation. No dramatic leaps or sharp gestures here, just a gentle poetry of human bodies moving in harmony with music that seems to flow like honey. And then the afternoon nap. Yes, even pharaohs, especially pharaohs, understood the divine necessity of the midday rest. Our royal bedroom is prepared with the reverence usually reserved for sacred rituals. The bed, already magnificent, is enhanced with additional cushions of the softest down, sheets that have been cooled with gentle breezes, and pillows positioned with geometric precision. Here, dear listener, you might find yourself relating most strongly to our ancient ruler, because there's something universally, timelessly perfect about the midday rest. The way your body settles into softness, the way your breathing naturally slows, the way the world outside seems to pause in respectful silence. Our pharaoh closes his eyes, listening to the soft trickle of fountain water, the distant whisper of palm fronds in the afternoon breeze, and the gentle rhythm of the Nile that flows eternal and patient beyond the palace walls. For this perfect hour, being divine means simply being comfortable. And really, isn't that a kind of paradise we can all understand? As the sun begins its gentle descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, our refreshed pharaoh emerges from his blissful midday retreat. The heat has softened now, becoming less of a blazing declaration and more of a warm embrace. It's time for the afternoon duties, those royal responsibilities that require actually venturing beyond the cool sanctuary of the palace. First on the agenda, inspecting the Great Pyramid construction. Now, you might think this involves a quick royal wave from a comfortable distance, but our pharaoh takes his eternal resting place quite seriously. After all, you want your afterlife accommodations to be properly accommodating. The journey to the construction site is itself a small ceremony. The royal litter, essentially a mobile throne room, sways gently as it's carried by bearers who've trained their entire lives for this honour. The curtains are drawn back now, allowing the cooler afternoon air to flow through. You can imagine the rhythm of their synchronised steps, can't you? That steady, hypnotic pace that turns travel into a kind of meditation. Arriving at the pyramid site is like entering a world of organised chaos that somehow makes perfect sense. Thousands of workers move in patterns that seem choreographed by the gods themselves. The sound is extraordinary, not harsh or jarring, but rhythmic and almost musical. The scrape of stone against stone, the gentle thud of wooden rollers, and above it all, the workers' chants that help them coordinate their massive efforts. Our pharaoh walks among the massive limestone blocks, each one cut with such precision that you could barely slip a papyrus scroll between them. The stone is warm from the day's sun, but not uncomfortably so, more like touching something alive and patient. The sand beneath his feet, yes, those precious sandals again, shifts and whispers with each step, creating tiny avalanches around his golden soles. The master builders approach with their daily reports, speaking in voices respectfully low but filled with quiet pride. Today they've positioned 17 blocks, each weighing more than several royal elephants. The pharaoh nods approvingly, understanding that his eternal monument grows stone by stone, breath by breath, with the patience of centuries. Next comes the military briefing, which honestly sounds more intimidating than it usually is. Our pharaoh settles into a pavilion erected specifically for these meetings, silk walls that filter the afternoon light into something golden and forgiving, carpets so thick they seem to swallow sound. The generals file in, each one more decorated than the last, bearing reports from Egypt's borders. And here's where things get delightfully predictable. Everything is always perfectly secure, the borders are completely peaceful, and there are absolutely no threats to the kingdom whatsoever. It's almost as if no general in the history of the world has ever wanted to be the one to tell a pharaoh that things might be less than absolutely perfect. Divine One, our enemies tremble at the mere mention of your name. The desert tribes speak of you only in whispers of awe. Even the crocodiles in the Nile have pledged their loyalty. You get the idea. The economic reports that follow are far more soothing than you might expect. There's something deeply relaxing about hearing how the kingdom prospers. Grain stores overflowing from the latest harvest, trade caravans arriving with exotic goods, tributes flowing in from distant provinces like rivers of gold and silver. The numbers flow like the gentle Nile itself, predictable, steady, reassuring. So many bushels of wheat, so many amphorae of wine, so many bolts of the finest linen. It's the kind of administrative poetry that speaks of a world where everything functions as it should, where the great machine of civilization hums along with well-oiled precision. As the afternoon light grows softer, casting longer shadows across the palace courtyards, our pharaoh reviews scrolls detailing improvements to irrigation canals, plans for new temples, and correspondence from allied kingdoms. Each scroll is unrolled with the gentle whisper of papyrus, each seal broken with the satisfying snap of dried wax. By the time the sun begins to paint the western sky in deeper shades of gold and crimson, the day's official responsibilities are complete. The kingdom runs smoothly. The gods are pleased, and the great pyramid grows ever closer to its destined perfection. Time now for our divine ruler to turn his attention to the gentler pleasures of evening. And perhaps, just perhaps, to keep a closer eye on those sandals as twilight approaches. As the sun begins its gentle surrender to the western horizon, painting the Nile in molten gold and turning the palace walls to warm honey, our pharaoh enters what might be the most luxurious part of his entire day, the evening bath. Because apparently, when you're divine, even getting clean becomes an elaborate ritual worthy of the gods themselves. The royal bathing chamber is a masterpiece of ancient engineering designed purely for pleasure. Picture stepping into a room where the very stones seem to exhale warmth and contentment. The floor is heated from below by channels of warm water, an ancient underfloor heating system that would make modern spas weep with envy. Your feet sink into thick carpets that feel like walking on clouds made solid. The bath itself isn't just a bath. It's practically a small, perfectly warm lake, carved from a single piece of black granite, polished until it mirrors the oil lamps flickering around its edges. The water, oh the water, is perfumed with oils that have travelled from the mysterious lands beyond the cataracts. Rose petals float on the surface like tiny boats, carrying their own sweet cargo of scent. Servants move around the chamber like gentle spirits, their movements choreographed by centuries of tradition. One tends to the oil lamps, keeping the lights soft and golden. Another sprinkles dried lotus petals into the water, where they dissolve slowly, releasing their ethereal fragrance. The sound of water being poured from golden vessels creates a gentle symphony, not the harsh splash of modern plumbing, but the musical cascade of liquid luxury. As our Pharaoh settles into this liquid paradise, you can almost feel it yourself, can't you? That moment when warm, scented water embraces every inch of your body, when tension you didn't even know you were carrying simply melts away. The water is the perfect temperature, not hot enough to be startling, but warm enough to make you want to stay forever. The massage that follows would make modern spa treatments look like amateur hour. These aren't just any hands working away the day's divine stresses. These are specialists who've studied the royal anatomy like sacred texts. They know exactly which muscles bear the weight of a golden crown, which joints suffer from sitting on thrones that prioritize majesty over comfort. Eventually, reluctantly, our refreshed Pharaoh emerges from his liquid sanctuary to prepare for the evening meal. Dinner in ancient Egypt wasn't just eating, it was theatre, concert, and social gathering, all wrapped into one delicious experience. The dining hall glows with the soft light of dozens of oil lamps, their flames dancing in gentle rhythm with the evening breeze. The air carries the mingled fragrances of roasted meats, exotic spices, and the ever-present sweetness of dates and figs. Musicians have already begun their evening performance, not the energetic entertainment of midday, but something softer, more contemplative. The harp strings sing like gentle rain on still water. The flute carries melodies that seem to float rather than play, drifting through the air like musical incense. And beneath it all, drums so soft they're more felt than heard, creating a rhythm that matches the natural pulse of evening itself. This is when our Pharaoh's evening takes on its most human dimension, family time. Royal children appear, freshly bathed and dressed in their own miniature versions of court finery. Even divine offspring, it turns out, have remarkably normal childhood concerns. Father, the scribes are teaching us hieroglyphs that are really hard to draw. Can we ride in the golden chariot tomorrow? Why do we have to learn 17 different ways to write eternal glory? The royal wives join the gathering, each bringing their own stories of the day. Palace gossip flows like wine. Who said what in the women's quarters? Which servants have been caught sneaking extra honey cakes? Whether the new dancing girls from Nubia are really as talented as promised. It's delightfully, wonderfully ordinary, with just a touch of gold leaf and divine authority. As the evening progresses and the oil lamps burn lower, casting longer, softer shadows across the walls painted with scenes of eternal paradise, our Pharaoh finds himself in that peaceful space between day and night. The kingdom sleeps safely under his divine protection. Tomorrow's responsibilities wait patiently in tomorrow's light. And for now, for this perfect moment, being a god simply means being surrounded by warmth, beauty, and the gentle contentment of another day, well-lived day. As the last golden threads of daylight fade into deep purple twilight, and the first stars begin their ancient dance across the velvet sky, our Pharaoh begins the most sacred transition of all. The gentle journey from divine consciousness into the mysterious realm of dreams. The evening prayers are not the grand ceremonial affairs of morning. These are intimate conversations between a weary god and the eternal powers that watch over Egypt's nights. Our Pharaoh walks slowly through corridors, now lit only by oil lamps that flicker like captured stars, their light creating pools of warm gold against walls painted with protective spells and benevolent deities. In his private chapel, moonlight streams through windows designed to frame the night sky perfectly. The silver light mingles with the gentle glow of sacred flames, creating an atmosphere that seems to exist between worlds. Here, surrounded by statues of Thoth and Isis, our Pharaoh speaks his gratitude for another day of successful divinity. Thank you for keeping the Nile flowing, for keeping the people content, for ensuring the sun remembered to rise and set in the proper order. The prayers are surprisingly practical, really. Even gods, it seems, appreciate when the universe runs smoothly and nobody has to intervene in cosmic catastrophes before breakfast. There's a special prayer of gratitude that the royal sandals stayed exactly where they were supposed to stay, because apparently even divine rulers learn from experience. The bedtime preparations are a symphony of gentle efficiency. Servants move like whispers through the royal chambers, their feet silent on carpets, thick enough to swallow sound. They've perfected the art of being helpful without being intrusive, present without being noticed. The royal bed, and calling it merely a bed, is like calling the pyramids stone arrangements, has been prepared with the reverence usually reserved for altars. Fresh linen sheets, woven so fine they feel like solid moonbeams, are stretched taut across a mattress, stuffed with the softest. Down from sacred geese, the pillows are arranged with geometric precision, each one positioned to cradle different parts of the royal anatomy in perfect comfort. Incense burns in small braziers around the room, but not the heavy frankincense of morning rituals. These are gentler fragrances. Lavender that seems to slow your heartbeat just by breathing it. Sandalwood that carries whispers of distant forests. And something mysteriously sweet that makes your eyelids grow pleasantly heavy. The night sounds of ancient Egypt filter through silk curtains. The distant call of night birds along the Nile. The gentle splash of water against reed boats. The soft conversation of palace guards making their rounds. It's a lullaby composed by civilization itself, a reminder that the world continues its peaceful rhythm while gods and mortals alike surrender to sleep. As our Pharaoh settles into his nest of impossible luxury, he gazes through windows that frame the star-scattered sky, the same constellations that guided the first pharaohs, that will guide pharaohs yet unborn, wheel slowly overhead in their eternal dance. There's something profoundly comforting about that continuity, isn't there? The way some things remain constant while everything else flows and changes, like the ever-patient Nile. What does a pharaoh dream about, you might wonder? Perhaps visions of completed pyramids that touch the very stars. Maybe conversations with gods who appear as old friends bearing advice about tomorrow's divine challenges. Or possibly, just possibly, dreams of golden sandals that never, ever wander off on mysterious adventures of their own. The oil lamps burn lower now, their flames dancing smaller and softer, casting gentle shadows that seem to breathe with the rhythm of sleep itself. The Nile murmurs its eternal song beyond the palace walls, carrying away the day's concerns, and bringing tomorrow's possibilities on its patient current. And as our divine ruler's breathing deepens and slows, matching the ancient rhythm of the river that has cradled Egyptian civilization since time began, as his eyes grow heavy with the sweet weight of approaching dreams, the palace settles into its own peaceful slumber, protected by gods both sleeping and wakeful.